All right, we are live. Titus, how you doing?
I'm all right.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, um, so what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about Henry George, the land value tax, and about deadweight loss in the economy, and compare that to a couple of the different tax propositions proposed by current candidates. They're fucking candidates.
Gotcha, gotcha. Before we get into that, is this more of a federal, as far as the U.S. goes? Is this more of a federal issue or a states issue?
It can be implemented on any level. It's it's best if implemented federally, but it could be implemented on any level.
Okay, all right. Go ahead and fill me in on what you know about it and what your thoughts are on it.
All right. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Are you familiar with the concept of deadweight loss?
I am not. No.
Okay, then we'll start there. And
Okay.
then we'll get to the solution or the remedy, as the author put it, Henry George. Um, Dead weight loss is when you have a tax. A tax is something in the economy, correct? The economy is just everything that's produced. Doesn't matter if it's local, state, federal, county. Any tax within an economy makes it so that it's harder to use that resource in the economy, whether it's the resource of selling things, if it's a sales tax, or if it's the resource of cigarettes, if it's a sin tax, tax cigarettes makes it a little harder to buy them because you have to pay more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and deadweight loss is an effect of the tax that affects something else in the economy that makes it so that the economy has to carry more weight in order to support the tax.
Okay. And
So
how
an
does that work
example
exactly? Okay. Yeah.
an example with a sales tax. I'll do this first because we're in Oregon. We already hate it. Um, a sales tax makes it so that if I want to sell something and buy something, but when I buy it, I have to pay a sales tax, and when I sell it, the person who buys it from me has to pay a sales tax. So the end amount coming out of that person's pocket when they buy it from me is taxed twice. So they have to pay the tax twice in their final price. So I have to pay the tax once, they have to pay it twice. Let's imagine a supply chain with 30 different distributors. So, you had to buy screws and sheet metal and electronics and everything else. And as you're going, you had to buy the metal for those screws. You had to paying the labor isn't part of a sales tax, but you had to buy the raw material for the metal from the mines, and every single part along the production. Let's say it had 30 different steps for every material. Then the end user is paying that tax 30 times by the time it gets down to them, because the person who sells it to them has to sell it at a profit, otherwise they go under and they can no longer do their work.
Mm.
And the person that they yeah, the person so and each person that buys it from the next person has to make sure that the profit they're adding to the materials as they're producing something is greater than the value of the tax that they had to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So any operations that would add value but not more than the value of the tax just couldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the deadweight loss of a sales tax. It means that things get much more expensive because of this tax, and the end users, the overall end user of whatever product it is, has to pay quite a lot more in order to use it.
Okay, real quick, just so I can picture something, is what you just described something that happens in most of the U.S. and most elsewhere outside of the U.S. And then also in the U.S. where it does happen, has this is this the way it happens? Is it somewhat recent, or has it been happening for the past like 3, 4 generations?
This would affect any. So this happens on anything that has a tariff or a sales tax, this particular form of deadweight loss. So the original point in the US where this would have affected would have been on the British colonies for the price of tea.
Hmm.
They would have to pay a tax on the price of tea, which means the shops have to make enough profit on that tea. They have to raise their price in order to afford the tax.
Okay.
And it happens in a lot of places in the U.S. It does not happen in Oregon, Texas, Montana. I'm not sure if Montana has a sales tax. Georgia, I'm not sure has a sales tax. Anywhere with a sales tax, and also anywhere with tariffs on international goods. So computer parts right now, electronics, anything that has a tariff for being sold internationally. So also affect every single person who's an end user or a tertiary user, someone who's the second or third user of a computer part. They have to make sure that whatever is going on around them in the economy, to have these computers around them that come from other nations, are affected, is profitable enough, or is they're willing to pay the price of consumption if they're not doing it for a profit. If it's not part of operations and it's consumption, then their price for consumption has to be a higher price point as well.
Gotcha. Okay, and so what do you think should be done about this?
Well, I was going to talk about deadweight loss and other forms of taxes for a moment.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All right, so right now we have a payroll tax. I think it's federal. I'm not sure, but every business that pays employees has to pay a tax on the price that they're paying their employees. So that price of operations for a business, if you're paying an employee, you have to make sure that your employee is profitable enough for their wages that you're paying them, and to pay the taxes of the payroll tax on top of that. So if your employee is wanting a raise, you have to pay a higher tax as well to give them that raise for that payroll tax. So that affects the end amount that businesses are able to pay their employees. You say they have an employee is looking for a raise, an employee wants a $2 raise, the business might be able to afford that, but then a $2 raise, they'd have to pay another 75 cents in tax. So instead, they can only pay the employee maybe a $1.50 raise. So that affects the end amount that's in every laborer's pocket at the end of the day. This is a payroll tax. On top of that, you have a tax on wages. So it's taxed from your employer, and then it's taxed when it goes down to you. It's your wages get taxed. So every employee after the money that's gone to them has been taxed, it's going to be, when it's given to them, it is also taxed. So you have your tax on wages, and you have your income taxes. So
the amount that the employer gives the employee is taxed, not counting the amount that the employee receives, what that is taxed before the employee takes home what they take home.
Yes. So your take-home income is taxed before you receive your take-home income if it's coming from an employer. So this is if you have a W-2 or if you have a 1088, I think. I'm not too familiar with, I'm not a tax lawyer or a tax expert. I do know a lot about one particular kind of tax, which is more important to know about than all the other ones, but I'll get to that later. If you tax you're taxed from the employer to the employee, then when you receive money from an employer, you have to pay an income tax, federal and state, right? So when you receive that money, it's again taxed. And that means that the deadweight loss in this scenario is a business has to be profitable enough to keep its employees fed. Otherwise, they're just going to stop working for them, right? You'll get strikes. You'll get all kinds of things that, like a strike is very, very bad for the economy, which in turn makes it so there's less wealth generally. Or even if an employee can't stay at their job for the price that they're earning, that's bad for the business. If they have to move, that's an employee with experience that has to change where they're at, which is bad for the business. But it's not necessarily true that every employer can afford to pay every employee more. So as the employee gets paid, they need enough money to live. That's what the situation we're in right now, because we don't tax the right things, is that when you're looking for a job, you're looking for something that keeps you from being homeless. That's because we have the wrong incentive set up. But in general, fear of homelessness is what keeps a lot of people working. And the dead weight on those two types of taxes that I just mentioned is that a business has to make enough money to support those two taxes on top of the price that the employee would have to pay, an employee would have to pay to support their lifestyle. And that lifestyle can include and should include investing and making themselves wealthier and all these other things. But the deadweight loss from that scenario is that as those two things get taxed, the profitability of that business has to go up and up and up. So there's fewer viable businesses that can be created that can support someone because they would fall under the weight of these taxes.
And I'm guessing that the taxes are less for smaller businesses, but it's still so much that it prevents businesses from succeeding?
I don't know. I think it changes by state. I don't know exactly how they are for smaller businesses, but I think that if you're trying to set those up, that's how you would do it. But I know that there's a lot of lobbying that goes on, and I haven't looked at the code for exactly how they work. I just know that regardless of the details, what's happening is that it's making it harder for businesses to provide employees with money.
Gotcha.
And also for employees to keep their money, right? That second one makes it harder for you to keep your money if the government just takes it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that the amount of money that you earn as an employee has to go up relative to the amount that you're taxed. If you're taxed a whole bunch of money, like they have much higher income taxes in Canada, you have to earn quite a lot more in order to be able to afford basic necessities.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got those two tax. Now we'll go capital gains tax. Capital gains, which can fall kind of into a sales tax because you only get taxed on it when it's sold. But capital gains tax has another form of deadweight loss, which is capital flight, which is something that a lot of people are complaining about. It happened in the United States in the 80s, really. But we're seeing large effects of it now with all of the rebuild, everyone trying to reindustrialize this nation. I think it can be done. I just think it'll be very expensive. And I think it'd be good if it's done. But I also think that if we tax the hell out of it as we're doing it, we'll get less of it. So that's why a lot of the people are saying, oh, we'll give them tax incentives to build the factories here. And then after the factories are built, we can start taxing them. And it's a bad model because that's what got them to leave in the first place was the taxes, or at least a piece of the equation. The more you tax, the bigger of a piece of equation bigger a piece of that equation it is. So you have capital gains tax, and you have taxes on things which are produced. You have inventory taxes. You have taxes on
Wait,
profitability.
I think I missed it, and I want to make sure I understood it. So capital gains tax is what exactly?
Oh, a capital gains tax is a tax on the stocks after you sell them.
Oh, okay. Just on stocks. Okay.
Yes, but you have other taxes which affect capital in a similar way. You have capital gains tax, you have inventory tax, and I believe there's also a tax on I can't remember what it is, but it's if you use materials to make something more expensive, then you're taxed on the value that you added, a value added tax, a VAT. So you have a capital gains tax, a value added tax, and you have an inventory tax, which taxes you for the value that you're adding to something, taxes you for the value that something you own goes up. So the value that's gone up since you bought something, and you have a tax on the things that you have which you haven't sold yet. Which means that in order to be profitable as a business, or as a large business even, small or large, the things that you have that you haven't sold your inventory gets taxed. The things that you have, which you have created, which you've adjusted them, you've manipulated them with labor, with machines, with different different processes, adding different materials, removing material, changing the shape of the material. You've made it more valuable. That gets taxed when you add that value. And then you also have capital gains tax on all the investors in the business, which is if they sell their stock and it's not in one of two tax protected accounts, like an IRA, or I can't remember the name of the other account, but if they sell their stock, then they have to pay a tax for buying something which was a good investment and then selling it. So as that gets purchased, right? As the value of that thing goes up, investors have less money to invest in businesses. So as the amount that is taxed goes up, investors have less money to invest in businesses. And what you're doing is you're disincentivizing investors from selling, right? And also from reinvesting money when they have it. You're disincentivizing businesses from keeping a large supply of materials on hand with that inventory tax, which is something that, it can be said that within the efficiency of production, you don't want to have too many materials on hand, otherwise you get bogged down. But also, one of the reasons Toyota was able to survive 2020 so well is because they kept a large stockpile of like 84 to 16 nanometer chips on hand in order to have they kept a few extra months, or maybe it was 6 or 12 months of stock of those materials, because they knew the supply chains were very complex for receiving them. So they were able to keep producing their cars when everyone else had no chips. So you want businesses to be robust and to be able to have inventory that they need in order to keep producing the things that they need to produce. Otherwise, something comes to shake the table and they could go under. But if you tax that, then that increases, that as you tax that more, the amount that a business will they factor that in as it happens. So the amount that a business will decide to keep on hand in case something happens will decrease. As that's taxed more, the amount that they decide to keep on hand in case something happens will decrease.
Gotcha.
So that's inventory tax, VAT, capital gains, and value added. So VAT, so let's say you have workers performing some kind of labor to make a product more profitable, then value gets added to that. And value added tax can even if you're not a business, if you're one person that's fixing up boats in their garage and you reach over a certain limit of how much value you added to the boat by, plugging a hole, rebuilding the motor, whatever you did to it, and reselling it on eBay, the government can say, hey, you added value to this object before you sold it. We're going to tax you on that. And what that does is that means that people will want to add value to things less that they're building. And that if they're trying to sustainably do it, so you don't want to go over a certain threshold for that. If you go over a certain threshold, the government will tax you.
Interesting. Okay, so let me see if I understand this correctly. So I own a house and we thought about moving to a different house. When I sell this house, if we spend $20,000 to fix things up, put on a new roof and that kind of thing, we will be taxed by the government just for the fact that we spent money to make it nicer?
Yes.
And
not
that's
only
just
that,
as
but
regular people.
Your current property tax would also be taxed higher if you didn't move out of it after you sold it, after you fixed it.
Okay.
Your current property tax would also go up for making it nicer.
And I got that, and I get that, and not that I accept it, but I'm aware of it. But I didn't know the part about doing it. So how would they go about that?
So
let's
if the
say we
value of
spent
the
20,000, we fixed things up, and then that happened. So that money exchange happened. We purchased the changes. The changes happened.
Yeah.
At what point does the government do something that affected that?
Uh, with your house in particular?
Yeah, like what is the action that's happening that makes us give more money because we added value to the house?
Uh, that'd be during the sale of the house. It'd be a value added tax, but it'd
Oh,
also be a
okay.
capital gains tax because it's your house has probably also gone up in value since you purchased it.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's say that we don't sell it. Let's just say we add the value to it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a tax for adding the value? If they can't, if we don't sell it, then they can't tax us when we sell it because
That
we
that
didn't
only
sell
gets
it.
sold. That only gets taxed at point of sale. But
Okay, okay.
because the property value has gone up, your property tax will be higher just for you improving your house. And I'll get
Okay,
to that
so
later too.
okay, so if I had a boat that I could sell as is, or I could fix it up and make the value more, um, and so let's say I could sell the boat as is for, we'll just do random numbers. We'll say I could sell the boat as is for $5,000, or I could add value to it and then I could sell it for $20,000. I get that there would be a different tax amount based on that dollar amount. Like
Hmm.
taxes on a $5,000 sale will be different than taxes on a $20,000 sale.
Well, not in
But
Oregon. There's no sales tax.
okay, but just okay,
In most parts of
but
the U.S. where there is a sales tax, yes.
okay, and then so there would be that difference based on the dollar value and what taxes are on like the value that you sell, but then also separately there would be an
The
amount that would come out for the fact that that I added more value to it than at one point that I had it.
yes,
That's
yeah.
wild, right? I
But
think that's
well,
wild.
that example's pretty good because you chose good numbers. I think that the threshold is 6,000. So after $6,000 of added value in a business, you have to like document that you're a business and that you're um this is the amount of value that you added to this thing before you sold it.
Hmm.
So that
Now
one
does
boat,
value just mean the dollar amount? Because what if I had that
yeah.
$5,000 boat and I didn't add anything to it? I didn't fix it up at all. I just chose to sell it for 20,000, even
If
though
you
it's
were
only
able to
worth.
sell it for 20,000, that'd be a value
Yeah.
added tax too.
Okay,
So
so value
if you
is just
purchased it for
referring to the
5 grand,
dollar. Okay.
if you purchased it for 5 grand and then sold it for 15, they'd say that's value added. Value added is a form of income, and what they're doing is they're disincentivizing people from adding a certain amount of value to their things because if they go over a certain threshold, they have to pay a tax on it. Or if they
Interesting.
are adding a certain amount of value to their things, then they're making it so that if you're doing that, you have to be over this threshold of what the tax is with your profitability. So let's say it took you 5 months to increase the value of that boat from six to $20,000.
Hmm.
Well, with no tax, 5 months income, 15 grand, it's pretty low, but maybe that's what you're living off of. But with tax, now you have to either figure out how to increase the value of that boat in a shorter amount of time so you can turn it over faster and actually get income during that time, or you're just unable to do it. You're unable to support the weight of that tax and the business is no longer viable.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, one more question, just because it's on the top of my mind, because the house thing. The value added, is it value compared to what it's considered to be worth, or value compared to what you paid for it?
In our current laws, it's value compared to what you paid for it.
So if I bought this house almost 10 years ago, it was 160,000. But then
Hmm.
when the market went wild, now it's worth 400,000. So what if it's sold for what it's valued at? That's still viewed as the value taxes being adjusted from what I paid for it.
Um, that would have to be. I'm not sure if that counts as capital gains or value added. Depends on how
Oh,
much work
okay.
you've put into it. But land isn't capital anyway, and I'll get to that as well.
Okay, yeah, I'm not too familiar with much of this, so I'm definitely excited to learn. I do have a question, but the question will only make sense once all the different types of taxes are mentioned, so I'll save that question.
Okay. Um, I think I've mentioned enough different forms of deadweight loss. So deadweight loss is a form that a tax has on the economy. It makes an individual, a corporation, an operation, a business, makes the economy carry more weight. So any tax within the economy that makes anyone have to do more work in order to support the weight of the tax would create a deadweight loss. So what things are there out there that you can tax that will not create a deadweight loss? It's an open question for you.
No idea.
Okay. That is why the name of the book that Henry George wrote is Progress and Poverty. And the subtitle underneath that name is An Inquiry into the Cause of Industrial Depressions and an Increase of Want with Increase of Production. The Remedy. And he lays it out pretty clearly what there is all around us that we can tax that will not only not have a negative effect, but will have a positive effect if it's taxed. So there's taxes that bear dead weight, and there's taxes that could bear positive effects if they're things that are taxed, and there are taxes which have no effect.
Gotcha. Okay.
Taxes with no dead weight loss.
Now that you brought that up, I'm going to ask my question I was going to ask, because that is essentially my question. I was going to say that assuming that the amount of taxes that takes place is ideal, because we could say, oh, we just need to tax less and then the government should just be spending less here or there. But let's imagine that the government is taxing the right amount and that we are accepting of where they spend. Assuming that, out of all the different options of taxes that exist, I was curious from your knowledge on this, what you think the worst one out there is that should be changed, and where that amount would come from then in that place. Like, which one of those ones that you just mentioned to me do you think is the most unfair or has the most negative effect on our economy?
It depends on what you're trying to do. So I think that a big one that's unfair is that value added, that so just all of them really. I don't go too. There are people who have ranked all the different kinds of taxes as to how bad they are, but it depends on what you're trying to do in the economy as well. So I'd say that a very unfair tax for, let's say, the city of Detroit, which used to be the wealthiest city in the United States, was all those taxes on corporations. Because what those did is they made those corporations leave. And it depends on the degree to which a tax is levied. It depends on, so if we were going 1% on anything, which one would have the most adverse effect? I think it'd be sales, because that just slows down the velocity of money so much, which is why some states already we won't have a sales tax. Like, no one will want a sales tax. A tax on sales, what that does is it means that every single step in the way, no matter what's happening, even if you're not selling at a profit, you still have to pay a tax on the sales. So, like, let's say it's a going out of business sale, and you're gonna go under, you still have to pay the weight of the sales tax for selling all the last of your inventory.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So for just 1% on anything, if every tax were levied at 1%, tax on sales is pretty rough. There are other taxes, when you get into higher percentages, though, they might have a much bigger effect on the overall economy. Let's say you're taxing production at 120%. So any production has to be 120% profitable, plus the profit that goes to the business. 120% of their profit goes to the government, and then anything that's any profit of theirs that's over 120% gets to be kept for the business. Well, those businesses might find a place to leave to that taxes them less. And if I were owning those businesses, I would have them leave immediately if that size tax were being levied on them.
Gotcha.
So,
Now, just curious if you happen to know, there are a lot of assumptions on why certain things lead to certain outcomes. Like you'll hear a lot of people talk about how having government assistance led to less marriages in the 60s and different things like
yeah.
that. And some of these guesses might be right or not. But as far as this one goes, with companies being taxed so much that they move their business elsewhere or don't have a business, is it usually stated somewhere? Is it like is it pretty known that companies will announce, because of this, we're doing this?
It's not normally announced that it's because of the environment where they go to. It's normally announced the other way. We're going to this new environment because it has less of these things.
Okay. But
Cheaper labor, less
it's less of an
taxes.
assumption and almost just like this is clearly an issue leading to this problem. Like
It's called capital flight. It happens all the time. Um, you can move your machinery, you can move your means of production, and if someone's trying to seize it, or if someone's trying to seize the wealth that comes from it, you can just pick it up, move it somewhere else. There will be a huge cost incurred, but if the cost incurred for moving, here's a general math problem for you. If the cost incurred for hiring people to move all of your equipment is less than the cost of the tax, then that's what's going to happen.
Interesting.
Because you'll look at your quarterly report, or you'll look at your annual report, or you'll look at your 15-year look ahead and say, depending on how big of a vision the company has, and say, hey, over the next 15 years, this tax will affect us this much. If we pay the lump sum now and just move the factory, we can save basically 10 years of this tax by moving to this other nation or other state.
Interesting. Okay, so now I'm really curious.
mean,
Where does this George fellow and yourself think that the taxes should take place?
All right. So I'm going to go over Trump and Harris at the moment before I go into that. So Trump's, now that we've explained dead weight loss, Trump's tax plan for the nation currently is higher tariffs. Increased tariffs. Well, what that does is that increases the price. Whatever has a tariff levied on it will have an increased price when it comes in and people have to buy it as a consumer good, or when people have to sell it inside of their shops. So, and it just leads to a decrease in the amount of things that we can buy and sell inside of the states. And Harris's idea for taxes, her revolutionary idea, is tax on unrealized capital gains, which could lead to capital flight. Because with that, and that would mean that people might want to stop using the New York Stock Exchange as a market even, or any US stock exchange as a market. Because right now, capital gains are taxed like at the sale of the thing. What she wants to do is start taxing, and I think it's for anyone over 100 million. It doesn't matter because it'll leak down into, as inflation comes in 200 years, every person's going to have a couple $100 million in their accounts. And what they want to do is tax the amount that you've grown over a certain period of time, regardless of whether or not you're taking your money out. Which will mean that less people want to use those exchanges where they're taxed on those things. More money will go into other markets globally where they don't have these dumb taxes. But she wants to tax people who have, I think, over 110 million or something in the markets for the amount of money that they've grown over a certain period of time without them selling their shares. So if they're taxed one day and then the shares fall the next day, they have a loss.
Gotcha. But just to see if I understood this part correctly, the actions that each of them want to do Trump's would lead consumers to be paying more for the products they buy, but it wouldn't be making companies leave. And then with hers, consumers would be paying less, but it would most likely be making
it would also make
companies leave.
consumers pay more. It's just later.
Oh, okay. Because the companies would raise their prices
and because the companies would go other places.
and go other places. Okay, gotcha.
So that would affect jobs. It would affect all kinds of things. Just unrealized capital gains tax would mean that other nations would look better for investors to live in.
Got it. Okay. Help me understand this real quick. The unrealized part. So I understand what capital gains is now.
Yeah.
What's
So when you sell it is when you're taxed on it right now.
okay?
She wants to tax you on it before you sell. Say, hey, your account's gone up $30 million in the past 20 years. You need to pay a tax on that amount before
Okay.
you sell anything. So it'll cut into your rate of return,
That
which could
sounds
have
really wild.
it could have the potential effect of everyone who has that amount of money in US markets would want to take that amount of money out, which would be very bad for investment. Or at
Gotcha.
least take out enough that, as the size of the tax is increased, that factors into their calculation of how much we want to take out more.
Gotcha. Okay, so
So
so so my mind, a person that knows almost nothing about this, the way of finding out how accurate this is, I can only think of one way. And so I'm curious if you or others probably have looked into this, or you can tell me really quickly why this is a stupid idea. Um, had there been previous elections where, let's say, back when it was Clinton or Bush or Obama, where there was a want to do one of these two things, and then the outcome played out how this prediction is?
I don't know what elections it happened during, but I would bring up again the city of Detroit because remember,
Hmm.
Detroit was the wealthiest city in the United States, and you wouldn't want to live there now. It's not that wealthy.
Yeah. Well, just
So,
assuming, really quick, sorry. Just assuming, and now I don't like to lump people into groups and assume that Republicans will always do a certain thing and Democrats will always do a certain thing. But let's just assume for the past four different presidents that let's just assume that when it comes to taxes, Republicans wanted to do what Donald Trump wants to do now, and Democrats wanted to do what Harris is wanting to do now. When Bush was president, was there more companies doing their thing? And then when Obama became president, did more companies leave because of taxes?
um,
Like because of that change in president?
I don't know the history of all these companies and
Okay.
like
Is it reasonable, the thought I'm having and asking this question? Is that a reasonable way to look at the
I wouldn't
situation?
say that it has to do very much with who's in control, and it has to do more with what policy they're enacting.
Oh yeah, and that's what I mean
So,
because I'm just
so when
assuming they're
laws,
enacting the same.
so I'm going to use Detroit again as an example.
Okay.
So when there were laws in Detroit that no company would be taxed for value added for paying their laborers, no laborers would be taxed for their income. Companies moved there and moved their factories there. That's the reason Henry Ford put his factory in Detroit. So there were laws at the moment that said that. Then, as
Hmm.
those laws were brought back in, they wanted to take advantage of the company while it's there, tax it more, pay for more public stuff through the work that the company's done. Because the factory's here, it's not like they're going to move it. Well, they moved it.
Hmm.
So when they enacted those taxes later, they moved the factory. They moved it to somewhere where labor was cheaper, and where taxes were also cheaper. And also in China right now, China's increased their corporate tax, I think, nearly to 50%, and companies are fleeing China like mad.
Hmm. Okay.
So as these things change, people move where they're at. A lot of companies are moving from China to India, to Malaysia, to um, are they going to Thailand? I think a few like companies that like were already based in Thailand are moving to Thailand as well. But a lot of companies that had separate factories in China where they kept their capital to do their production are moving from China to other nations or back home
Hmm.
because it's not worth it with the new taxes. Also, there's a lot of other military things that China's doing that are uh, risk factors as well. But
Gotcha. Well, okay.
they increased their taxes too once the capital was there.
Gotcha. Okay, couple things. This is a complicated topic. Most people I know nothing about this topic, and it's just really complicated. But out of the people that do know about the topic, is there a counter, and what is the counter to what you're saying?
Well, this
Like,
is
what's the
Henry
steel
George's
man?
idea.
What's the Kamala Harris stance steel man?
What's the steel man for what Kamala Harris is doing?
Yeah.
These corporations are taking money from the laborers, and so they need the money that they're taxing, that they're taking needs to be taxed and given back to the public.
Okay,
If they're
so
profitable,
if they couldn't, if they were forced to not pick up business and leave, then it actually might be good. The downside to what they're doing is scaring people away.
well, yeah, if there were no incentives created by it, then it could work. But
Mm,
the fact is that as you change people's incentives, their behavior changes. So as you
gotcha.
change the business's incentive to stay there, they'll leave or they'll become unprofitable and go under.
Okay, so why would a knowledgeable person on this topic? I get why non-knowledgeable people would just they vote blue because they vote blue, they vote red because they vote red, they might vote on specific topics like abortion or whatever. Why would a knowledgeable person on this topic not not vote based on it? What you're telling me?
Well, there's other incentives for voting too. Like I'd
Mm.
say that the three biggest things that people actually vote on are what you mentioned: abortion is a big one, gas prices is another one, and what else? Abortion, gas price. I thought there was one more that is
Maybe
really
like a
huge.
healthcare or something.
Yeah, but there's no one's actually done anything about making healthcare better in the U.S.
Is gas prices connected to what we're talking about?
Yeah, you can say that it is. It is in a major way when you look at how Denmark taxes everything. But these are all different forms that dead weight loss can enter the economy.
Hmm.
Um, so sorry, your question was why would people vote if they know about these things?
Like people that are
For
knowledgeable on this. I'm guessing most people aren't knowledgeable on this, but the ones that are probably wouldn't let like abortion or some other hot button topics sway the outcome of the economy.
yeah,
Would you say that most people that are knowledgeable on this just
well,
happen
there's
to
not really a
agree?
party that represents financial responsibility at the moment.
Oh, okay.
Like the Republicans used to, but they've kind of changed from that and they've become Donald Trump's cult.
Hmm.
And long before that, the Democrats used to back before the Republican Party existed. And then the Republicans were the revolutionaries that let's end slavery, and then their party changed a little bit as it goes on. It became more about financial responsibility, and then recently it's become like Donald Trump's cult. And the
Hmm.
Democratic Party has also kind of been gutted since Obama. Like, uh, he didn't really leave any real predecessors after him. Is why Joe Biden got elected after him for a Democratic candidate. Like, just his vice president was the only person they could think of, and now it's what his vice president's vice president. So there's not really a strong line of Democratic because he kind of gutted the Democratic Party and made it more about DEI than it was about um, labor unions, all the other things. Right now, the Republicans are stealing the union faction a little bit. There's there's push and pull between the two of them.
Gotcha.
Um,
Um, really quick, another question. Sorry to throw so many questions at you. Um, in a second, I'm going to have you tell me all the different things of where the taxes could go. But to make that happen, who's in charge of this? What is this more of a Senate decision, members of the House decision? Would a president have any um, like large impact that's larger than a Senate vote on deciding something like this?
Um, on deciding just different tax policy.
Yeah, to like remove certain taxes like you're talking about and to make taxes come out elsewhere.
Um, I don't know how that works within the U.S. system very well. I think that it's the president. If I'm going back to U.S. history, pretty sure the president was the one who implemented the whiskey tax. Um, but I'm not sure. I don't remember very well.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'm
I
not
usually
too
think of
familiar
the
with how the
president
laws get
as
changed.
okay. I usually think of the president as having not too much say. They will nominate a Supreme Court justice member that could have an effect on things, but for the
Yeah.
most part, it seems like at
I
least
think that
yeah.
Congress has a lot to do with how taxes are written.
Okay.
I'm not sure though.
Okay.
I think it would be introduced as a bill and uh, then become law, tax law.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So what would be a possible change that could happen?
So when you tax sales, wages, employment, capital gains, value added, when you tax all these things, you get deadweight loss. When you tax just the value of the land, there is no deadweight loss. And this is the value of the land without anything built on top of it. So the location value of the land, also the mineral value of the land. So anything that has to do with extractable value, the gas, the the different minerals in the land, gas, gold, copper, magnesium, whatever it is. When you tax those things, you're not changing the amount that there are because they existed before anyone produced them.
Mm. Okay.
You're not changing the amount of land that there is when you tax it. You'll change the sale price of the land. The sale price generally go down of the raw land.
Mm.
But when you tax just the things that existed that people didn't create, and that can include ideas as well. That can include there's a difference between a copyright and a patent. When you tax patents, and you say, or if you just disallow patents and you say, no, now that it exists, it is something that people can use. If they want to use your version of it, they can buy it from you directly, but you don't have ownership of this idea. It's a discovery. It depends on discovered ideas versus created ideas. When it's like a copyright on a book like Harry Potter is different than a patent on something like insulin.
Velcro. Oh, okay.
Like a patent on insulin. Like, yeah, we discovered insulin. It's very useful, but you shouldn't be the only one who has the ability to make, manufacture, and sell it
Mm.
because it it's very useful, and giving you the sole monopoly over that is going to increase the prices, and we need as many people making this as we can in order to help people. But when you tax, and it's the same with land, as I mentioned earlier, the threat of homelessness is what keeps a lot of people working in their jobs. And a lot of people work 30 years to pay off a mortgage as well.
Mm-hmm.
So really what's keeping a lot of people working is the price of the home that they are trying to live, the space that they want to live in. And if you were to remove taxes from their sales, from their value added, from their income, and replace those taxes with a tax just on the land that they're using, what happens is it disincentivizes people from owning land that they're not going to use, or speculation on the value of land.
Mm.
As that gets speculated on, it keeps on going higher. So let's say you own a piece of land and someone else moves a factory by the land and another person builds apartments by that land. Now the value of your land has gone up because of the relative labor and the relative capital. So the people that live nearby and the capital of the factory that's been built there have both increased the price of your land and you did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's value that's going into this land that, if it were taxed away, would have no ill effect on the economy.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Another way of looking at it is public infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm by Portland. I don't know if you've been here, but there are some bridges. What does a bridge do to the value of land at one end and at the other end?
I mean, I'm guessing the access would make it more valuable, but I have no idea.
Yeah. Having a way to get from one side of the river to the other side of the river makes that point a lot more valuable. Bridges are paid for out of public money. So if you are paying your taxes and building this public infrastructure, it's your tax dollars going directly into making the value, making the bridge. It's supposed to be useful for society. Build as many bridges as you want. Portland's infrastructure still sucks because it's not supporting all these homeless people. But it's the value that's going into these bridges. It's coming from your tax dollars and going straight into the value of land at either side. So that's money that's taken out of the Commonwealth and given straight into the value of the land on either side. Instead, you could build and maintain and pay for these bridges the other way. Building this bridge will increase the value of the land on either side. If that value is taxed out of that land when the bridge is built, that means that the increased tax on the land around the places that this bridge makes more accessible will support the price of the bridge and maintain it. So instead, we continually maintain the bridges out of the price of labor, out of the price of the factories, out of the price of all these other taxes that are coming from. You could literally just support it on the value that it adds to the land around it.
Gotcha.
Are we allowed to go on?
Yeah. I got a few more minutes.
All right.
10, 15, somewhere in there.
All right, sweet. So Henry George broke the economy down into 3 different segments in his book, his main book, Progress and Poverty, which I would really recommend you read if you want to learn more about this, because it is insanely well done. And it's for a book written in the 1869, I think, it has held up immeasurably well. I mean, Einstein said that Einstein was a generation after. Einstein said that every word was written as if it was for his generation.
Oh, wow.
And I agree with him about my generation as well. Every word in that book
even though it's held up, has anybody written kind of like a modern version that you think is also a good read?
I don't know, because I just prefer the original. I haven't looked.
Gotcha. Okay.
If you were looking for more modern versions, you'd go for the Henry George School of Social Science. They've got a YouTube channel. But for the whole book, I would just recommend the original book still.
Yeah.
It's the same way Einstein said every word is written as if it was for his generation. I would agree every word's written as if it was for my generation as well. There are some older words in it, but...
Oh, I'm not worried about that. I was just curious for when I recommend books to other people and whatnot.
Yeah. So he breaks the economy down into 3 different segments in that book: land, labor, and capital. You need materials, raw land. You need someone to work those materials, and you can have capital after that. Capital is anything that you've made that has stored up value of labor in it. You build a rake, you you take a stick, you cut it up, and then you bend the prongs that you've cut off so that it can become a rake. Until that rake breaks, it has the stored value of your labor. It makes your gardening easier. That's what capital is. Capital is just things that we've built that help us labor more easily. And they require labor to be made. They require labor to be maintained. And eventually they all degrade. Everything that's made out of capital will eventually degrade. But it's a stored up value of labor, which makes labor easier. And those are basically the only three things in an economy. Land is a natural resource, and it is the only anything that is a natural resource could be considered land. I consider clean breathing air land. I consider falling water land. It has, because the water's falling, it can turn a turbine. It's very important that. So in Norway, they have taxes on their oil. If you have the rights to mine the oil, then you have to pay the tax for that right to mine it. And that makes it so that their oil mining is happening continuously, is happening very well. And the money from that tax is going into their citizens' retirement fund, basically. They have a similar tax on falling water because it can be used to make energy. If you have the right to use that falling water for energy, then you have to be using it. Otherwise, like if you're just sitting on it waiting for the price of energy to go up before you build your turbines, you're paying that tax, and you can't afford to pay that tax without building your turbines first.
Gotcha.
And otherwise, you sell it to someone else who already has the money to build those turbines, and they will build them and make their money off of it for those licenses. So all those things I consider part of land. It's extractable value. It's something that can be discovered. It's something that has a location value. Everyone says location, location, location. No one realizes that there's a finite amount of locations, and once they've all been claimed, then there exists a class of people who have no right to anything, no right to any of the land, no right to a place to stay. You're either born as a trespasser or as someone who's being given a place to stay by someone who owns that area. So you're either in debt, or like it's indebted, or they're being generous, or you're a trespasser for your place to live. There's land, labor, which is anything that you do. The result of labor is wages. So you dig a hole, your wages are that hole. If you work under a contract that you're earning a certain amount of money per hour, the result of the time you being at work for that time is the money in the contract. But you pick berries, your wages are the berries. The result of land is rent. The economic result that comes from land is the rent. You get the increased value that comes from being around things, or having all the other land taken. As the land goes up in value, that's a form of economic rent. It's rent charged on the economy. For the ability to build something there, you need to be able to pay that market price. And then there's the rental value of, if you're using this land, you can pay the owner rent. But all of these things, every single title that land is, every single title of ownership of land comes from a war. If you go back, you can see the title split here, it split here, it split here, the land was subdivided. But if we go back to the point where the title was established, it was established right after a war. It's a spoil of war. And Henry George goes over in his book that the system of taking land and claiming ownership of it was originally a two-part system where everyone would take land, claim ownership of the land and the people on it, like the encomienda system that Spanish used for South America, or like just basically any warring system. If you can imagine any people claiming land and the people on it is the result of war. And we abolished chattel slavery in the 1800s, but we didn't change our landholding rights. And what that's effectively done is it's made it so that your labor goes to the holders of land. Use a 30-year mortgage is common. Everyone knows what it is. It's you work for 30 years of your life and you get the right to a place to stay. That's the system. That's what everyone thinks is fair.
Mm.
And then you have, sorry, can you back me up just a second? I forgot where it was at.
Before saying the 30-year mortgage.
Yeah.
You were talking about ending slavery, but not ending. Or are you talking about before that part?
The system where we use to get the titles, which we use to claim exclusive right to land, it all originates in war. And before it was you would claim the right to the people on the land and the land, which made it a lot easier to solve problems of like, oh, what happens to the people if you claim this territory? Easy. They became your slaves. Now we have that problem of what happens to the people if a nation annexes another part of a nation. It's happening in different parts of the globe right now. What happens to the people that live there? And it's like, well, the reason that's because Russia's already made titles for different parts of land in Ukraine, and we still have that system. You lay claim to a piece of land, you establish a title, it belongs to your country, and it's your national sovereignty or the might of your army, which keeps other countries from contesting that claim. But the slavery part, it's become taboo. But those two things are part of the same system. You lay claim to someone's land, you take their people for slaves. Anyway, that's what gives people the right to charge rents in our society, or to have the right to the value of the economic rent as it increases underneath their house. It's established on those things, even if you're not the one doing it, you're profiting off of the same system.
So how does that change exactly? Okay, so let's say we move taxes from all the things we've talked about at the beginning here to just being land taxes. Would that make the land either land being sold from an owner or being rented from an owner? Would that make those prices? How would that affect those prices?
It would lower the prices. So what you're not just taxing land, right? Because as I already said, the return to land is the rent. So you're taking the rent as a public return instead of as a private return. So if you're renting and your landlord increases the price of your rent without increasing the value in the building you live in, without adding a hot tub, hot towel service, replacing all your lights, maintaining the building, changing the gutters, redoing the roof, they charge you a higher rent without doing those things. What they're doing would be, under the system, increasing the assessed tax value of their property so that they pay more taxes.
I don't know if I followed that.
So you're taking the value of rents. So the return to land is rent. What you're doing with this tax is you're taking that land value, the rent, the economic rent, and you're changing it from a privately owned thing to a publicly owned thing, or at least a government owned thing. I don't know if it should be the government, or you can go into the weeds of whether or not government should exist, but that's such a long conversation. I'm just going to say that we're changing our current tax laws so that you have a land value tax. So the assessed rental value, which can be done with a map, you use a map of the whole area that everyone can see, and you can see these areas pay more tax, they have more public infrastructure around them. These areas they have more natural resources, they have a river for transportation, they have ports, all of these other things. The value of the land is what creates that. And these areas pay more taxes because of those things. And you can see the gradient as it goes along a piece of land here is worth far more than a piece of land out away from all the rivers and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So you're by the airport, you're by the bus station, you're by the port, and you have access to internationally traded goods, you have access to travel international, and you have access to get around without using a car. All these different things that are publicly provided would increase the value of the land where you're at. And right now they do that still. It's just that money goes to whoever holds the land, which came from whoever was able to buy it from whoever conquered the place.
Gotcha.
Ultimately. But the thing is that if you own that title to the land, you're the one who pays the tax. And that tax is on the rental value of your land. So you own that land, and you're paying the tax for the price of the land at its rental value, which is shown on that gradient map if you want to use that earlier. This is something that anyone can see, can test, can say, hey, how come this person's paying far less taxes when he's like right in Beverly Hills? It's very expensive land. You'd be able to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's easily something that we can see and we can fix because it's not a smooth gradient. Sorry, your question was, how does that affect renting?
Mm-hmm.
So if you raise the price that someone has to pay to rent your land or rent a home on your land, and you haven't built more home, and you haven't done anything to increase the services you're providing, then what you're doing would be personally assessing your land as being at a higher rental value. And if your land's at a higher rental value, that's the value that you're assessed at for your taxes.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay, yeah. So I do got to hop off here in a couple minutes, but a couple like quick questions to get people thinking about how to think more about this. For people that don't know anything about it, aside from checking out this book, is there a best focus for people to have? Like it's really easy to pick topics that people can easily understand, like something like abortion or various things where they can go, oh, I just think this is right, or whatever. But something like this is pretty complicated, and not knowing how it would play out and the outcome is complicated. Is there a simple element to focus on? Is there a type of taxes that we should be holding our politicians to task on?
Well, I would just say whenever a tax is introduced, you'd ask what the deadweight loss is. And if the tax has no deadweight loss, I would say try to move any taxes that you see which have one to move the burden from that onto something that wouldn't have deadweight loss.
Gotcha. Okay.
If you're looking for resources to learn more about it in an easier way, there's the Henry George School of Social Science. They've got a YouTube channel. There's the audiobook, which is free on YouTube. It's also a book from the 1870s. So, my goodness, camera's reversed. It's also a book from the 1870s. So you can download a free copy online. I had a copy printed. My coworker has it right now. I'm glad that he's reading it, which is awesome to me. There's a Mr. Beat video on YouTube called The Least Bad Tax, I think, which is Milton Friedman, an economist. When did he live? It was right around the same time as Reagan and Thatcher, and his 80s kind of. Milton Friedman describes land value tax as the least bad tax. So that video is a play on that old quote. So Mr. Beat's video, The Least Bad Tax, is a good place to start if you want to learn about this. He also has a video where he ranks taxes by which ones are worst, which is the precursor to that video. There's a YouTube channel called Brit Monkey, which has a video on. He has two videos, one on Georgism and one on the land value tax. Both are really good. You can see how, just how anyone, including Russian oligarchs, can just buy a place, let it sit there, wait for its value to go up without adding any value to the economy, own it under legal right, do nothing for anyone else, and their money increases. Their economic is a good investment. They've done nothing. All they do is sit and hold, and it works.
Now you mentioned different tax approaches that Harris and Trump wanted to do. Do either of them have they made any stances that would affect what you just said? The
Nope.
idea of holding. Oh, okay.
Nope, I'm not voting for either of them. They both have horrible policy.
Gotcha. And then somebody in chat is wondering if you've read anything by Lydander Spooner. Does that name sound familiar to you?
No, I don't think so. What's the book that he's asking about?
Well, he'll probably answer that once he heard you say it. But I'll let you know if it pops up. But yeah. Okay. So my last question to you, it wouldn't be anything we'd get into a conversation now about, but is there a topic? Is this the most important topic to you when it comes to political change? And if not, what? I'm guessing it's
This
near the
is
top.
the most important lens to me when it comes to political change. Is it the most important topic? I think it'd be very nice to have housing affordability. I think it'd be nice to be able to improve your homes without being taxed for improving them more. I think it'd be nice to not have this deadweight loss in the economy, higher wages for people. I think it'd be very nice for people to own their homes after a couple years of living in them, be able to own your home in a couple years. I think that wages wouldn't fall to the minimum necessary for subsistence, or people wouldn't be only operating under the threat of homelessness when they're choosing what jobs they have. I think that's very important. I also think that there are a lot of other things we can change about land use that I see through this lens. So there's permaculture as a solution to environmental degradation. You know, the Great Green Wall project in Africa, where they are building half moons, digging them, and reforest. Well, they're reforesting the Sahel with a food forest, so it's increasing the economic viability of the farmers and greenifying the desert at the same time, which is, I think it's the right lens to look at some of these issues in. I think that there are a lot of other issues that are related that could be fixed. I think that you would need something different than this to fix the opioid crisis, although this would definitely dampen its blow. But there are a lot of issues right now that I see as more important than your opinion on the price of gas and on abortion. I think people should really consider how many people are dying of opiates around us. I think people should really consider how hard it is to buy a home or to rent. I think people should really consider salmon populations and the amount of water that's going into flooding and then droughts. So slowing the rate at which water flows across the landscape through different structures, which can be incentivized through a system like this if you structure it correctly. Where if you say, because as you slow the rate at which water flows across the landscape, you reduce the effect of flooding and the effect of droughts at the same time. More water sinks into the water table. So regenerative farming, where you farm in a way that replenishes the water table and builds soil. You don't need to spend money on fertilizers, and it's more efficient per acre, just not per mass production. So I feel like those are things that need to be incorporated into the way we see how we use land. Also, just fix traffic. Like, a single lane is perfect. It has an 1,800 car capacity. The thing that's making traffic isn't the amount of lanes or the capacity of the roads during rush hour. It's the bottlenecks in the traffic systems. We should have more public transportation, and we should be paying for it in a way that isn't drawing on all the citizens, in a way that it pays for its freaking self. It's so valuable, then why can't it pay for itself? Well, the
Gotcha.
reason it can't is because we have the land use. This is what Henry George talks about the public railroads in his book as well,
Mm-hmm.
or just all the railroads across the United States. People say they were overbuilt. They weren't. They were over speculated on. All the land around the railroads as they were built was already bought and purchased.
Mm.
And everyone raised the purchasing price of that land increased so much that when it came time for everyone to settle all of America around where the railroads were built, they couldn't pay the speculative price. So they had to do what everyone's doing now. Cars changed that. They created the urban sprawl, which is its own problem, but they made it so you could buy a house further away from the city. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we needed to do to fix it, because now we're in the same problem. We're used to cars, and now we have the same problem in land speculation everywhere within driving distance of work.
Gotcha. Um, so I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to read this book, and then I'm also going to try to search out for counter opinions to find why people would be against these ideas. And then I'd love to set up another talk with you after I've read the book and I've tried to find if there even are. It might just be a topic that people either don't know, or when you know, it's almost all unanimously agreed upon.
There's a group of ANCAPs. The ANCAP group does not agree. And there's a counter opinion video if you want to watch it from Liquid Zulu called, I think, Why Henry George Was Wrong, or
Okay.
Could Georgism Fix the Problem, or something like that. The thing about that video is that, like, he misrepresents it. He's not working off of the tenets in the book. And in the examples that he gives, I already have, like, okay, he missed us. He missed something here. He didn't include the full effect of this here. And there's, like, he's saying that it works on different principles than it does. And, you know, I can't expect everyone who's criticizing the idea to read the book twice so that they catch everything. But there are counter arguments, but that's like the most popular one that there is. And I've seen it. If we want to stir up YouTube drama, maybe it'll get you some more views.
Well, maybe
If
I could
Liquid
just
Zulu
find
wants to talk to me about it, then he can.
Yeah,
But,
maybe I could find somebody that counters it that wants to talk, and then they can present some of their ideas ahead of time, so you know it could be prepared for almost like a debate. So you can know what to counter in advance. I do got to hop off here, but the person that talked about an author named Spooner said the book is called The Constitution of No Authority. So I don't know if you're interested in checking that out.
All right,
But,
I'll look at it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be aligned with George.
Okay.
But yeah, cool. Well, great talk, and hopefully we can have another one in the future.
All right. See you,
All right,
Carson.
take care.